everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Good evening, gentlemen.
No.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm gonna
You
break
almost
this.
went British.
I almost went British, damn it.
I knew you did.
Well, I'm going
waiting
to
for
tell you,
that.
tonight is not the night for the British accents because we are traveling back to New York tonight for
Oh, well, that's good. I
the
can't do a New
story
York
that is
accent, so
going
we're
to be
good.
taking
We're
place.
good.
I've been fascinated with this story for a very long time. It's one that I've researched, and it's over our topic tonight is over the Cardiff Giant. And when I first brought it to Blake was like, I don't think I've ever heard of the Cardiff Giant. I go, I bet you have. Listen to the story, and I bet it will ring a bell. And you still kind of know minimal about it. You're going to be learning something tonight.
I'm very minimal about it. Yeah, about the only thing I know is that it was a giant.
It was a giant.
That was discovered.
Who doesn't love a good giant? How about you, Ryan? You know a little bit about this story, don't you?
I do. I do know a little bit about it. I don't know as much about it as I used to because it's been a while since I read the story. So I'm excited to get back into it and relearn.
Well,
So.
it involves some of my favorite things: New Yorkers, con men, and a good hoax on the religious people. I love stuff like that. They're going to pull a fast one on the good and the faithful. So anyway, without further ado, I guess we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right. So on October 16th of 1869, William Stubb Newell of Cardiff, New York, decided to dig a well on his farm. And he hired a group of workers and they set up on the task. Before long, they came to a stone that was blocking their progress. And they began to dig around it, trying to find the edge. But to their horror, what they unearthed was what appeared to be a foot. And this caused quite a commotion among the workers, and they summoned Stubb from his farmhouse. And Stubb, he seemed real uneasy, and he told the men just stop digging. But the workers wanted to know what the heck it was. And with a new frenzied excitement, they began to remove the dirt around the blockage, and a figure emerged from the earth. It was a 10-foot tall, 3,000-pound petrified giant.
Jesus, that is massive.
Huge. Now, giants play a part in all cultures. And to be considered a giant, the only requirement seems to be that you have to be over 7 feet tall. Greek and Roman mythology, they have giants that are known as the Cyclops and the Kraken. And children are told stories about giants like that in the one of Jack and the Beanstalk. And they're also used in advertising. The most recognizable, of course, ho, 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 green giant. Jolly green giant. And Canada and America share the same story and folklore of a very recognizable folk hero, Paul Bunyan. And of course, you know, there is a cryptid in there too. That's what makes this everything vaguely paranormal. Bigfoot is also considered to be a giant because he stands more than 7 feet tall in most reports. Now, in literature, giants are often used to represent the obstacles that the hero has to overcome to fulfill his destiny. And in the Bible alone, there are more than 11 specific references to giants, most famous found in the story of David and Goliath. But giants have also lived among us and still do today. Professional wrestler Andre the Giant at 7'4" and
He's my
basketball
favorite.
legend Wilt Chamberlain at 7'1" are both considered to be giants. Now that little shrimpy dude in the middle, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. We think of him as being a big dude. Wilt Chamberlain is on the left and Andre the Giant is on the right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
you'd have thought that Arnold Schwarzenegger would have been a little bit bigger than that, wouldn't you?
You'd think so.
Yeah, but the tallest man that ever lived, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, was Robert Wadlow from Alton, Illinois, known as the Alton Giant or the Gentleman Giant.
Mm-hmm.
And he stood a towering height of 8'11" and was still growing at the time of his passing on July 15th of 1940. And he was just 22 years old. But
Damn.
we have to go a little farther back to get to the story of the Cardiff Giant. Now, in the 1860s, people's beliefs about faith were focused on everything in the Bible. The majority believed that the Bible was factual, not metaphors, not symbols, and most were unquestioning in their acceptance. Traveling preachers and tent revivals were just as big of a deal as local county fairs and traveling circuses. But the emergence of natural sciences and Darwin's theory of evolution were slowly beginning to erode away at the masses' unquestioning faith. And this was the case for an entrepreneuring,
That word. Words
One
are
of them
hard.
words.
Let me change it. That was the case for an enterprising Irish-born New York tobacconist named George Hull. Hull was born in either Connecticut or Massachusetts. He reported both locations on different occasions. And he arrived in Binghamton in the early 1850s after dabbling in petty crime by developing a new form of marked playing cards. Well, that little venture earned him a short stint in jail. He wasn't well educated, but he had the inventiveness and imagination. And in 1860, he developed a modified harness snap for horses. He was a member of the cigar manufacturing family that operated the Hull Grummond Company. He was a cigar maker by trade and a self-described atheist and overall skeptic in general. And Hull looked like the stereotypical villain in a melodrama. He had slicked back hair, a mustache, a piercing stare, and was clothed in black from his shoes to his plug hat. And he was a towering man. He stood 6'3", which would have been considered a giant for that period of time.
He's just missing a curled mustache. That's all he's missing.
Yeah, I was looking for one because it was rumored at some point that he did wear the curled mustache and a beard, but I couldn't find a picture of him. It's so difficult to find pictures of old Georgie Hull. And in his family, he was definitely considered the black sheep. He was known to be a scoundrel, and he rather enjoyed playing the part of the villain. George was constantly getting involved in various dealings and get-rich-quick schemes. And they usually ended in failure. Most likely, he was costing the company more than he was producing. And during a business trip, the seed for what would become one of the 19th century's most elaborate hoaxes first planted itself in George Hull's fertile imagination. Excuse me?
I'm like, he was 6'3". I am
Right.
5'7" on a good day.
Well, I am exactly 6'3", so as tall.
Yes, I know. I feel very short next to you, Ryan. Thanks.
Everybody feels very short next to Ryan.
Yes.
So it was 1867, and George Hull was traveling for business to Iowa. But it wasn't all business. He planned to stop in and visit his sister while he was in town. In need of a distraction to break up the boredom, he started up a conversation with a fellow traveler, Mr. Turk. And as luck would have it, the atheist had instigated a dialogue with the Reverend Mr. Turk. Turk was a traveling Methodist revivalist who was on his way to offer salvation to the next needy batch of wayward sinners. This should be fun, thought Hull. And, he just delighted in arguing about religion. And a conversation about the Bible ensued. Soon, George was locked into a theological debate with the preacher, and the conversation got intense when Reverend Turk asserted that the Bible should be taken literally, word for word, as truth. Come on, not everything in the Bible actually happened, George argued. But Reverend Turk, determined to convince George, pulled out his handy King James Version of the Bible and began to quote his scripture. Amongst the chosen passages was Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days. You really believe in giants? George asked him. And Reverend Turk replied, the Bible tells us there were giants. Yeah, but do you really believe there were actually giants stomping around? George asked. Reverend Turk held up his Bible like a shield from the atheist and replied, Genesis 6:4 says it to be true. There were giants in the earth in those days. And after a moment of pause, George asked, "So how big do you think these giants were?" The preacher immediately replied, "About 10 or 12 feet." As if it was already an established scientific fact.
Hold on. Where's he pulling this 10 or 12 feet from?
That's what I want to know.
That's why I said he said it as if it was already an established fact.
Yeah, okay.
Because the preacher's reply was immediate.
Yeah, but I like old George here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just imagine this Archie Bunker looking asshole going, wait.
Right.
So George stewed for a moment. So let me get this straight. Because it's in the Bible, it's a fact, at least as far as you're concerned. And without hesitation, Reverend Turk answered, "The Bible is a factual book, a telling of God's love and promise and wrath and forgiveness. Those facts cannot be disputed. Giants did exist. It is most certainly a fact because it is in the Bible." George argued, "That's just ridiculous. If there were giants, then where are they now?"
This is an argument I would have. Where are they now? Come on now. Come on, man.
Reverend Turk, with a sly smile, replied, "They were smite from existence due to their wickedness."
Then there should be some sort of fossil record.
And the conversation came to an end, with neither party successfully convincing the other. So the men went their separate ways. Now, George was just flabbergasted by the preacher's literalist reading of the Bible, in particular, that passage about the giants. That was really bugging him. And he lay in bed that night and he just couldn't let it go. He wondered how people could believe the fantastical stories about giants in the Bible. How foolish must one be? And as George mulled over the conversation in his mind, the Bible passage repeated itself in his head. There were giants in the earth in those days. There were giants in the earth in those days. There were giants in the earth. The good Reverend Mr. Turk had indeed made an impression. And George had learned something that day. And with his own sly smile, he knew what he was going to do. George was hatching a marvelous plan. One that, if done right, would allow him to strike a blow against religion and make a pretty penny along the way. He would make a stone man, a stone giant, and pass it off as a petrified man. But where would he put it? How would he make it, credible? Yeah, details. He would think on that in the morning.
He's just, at this point, though, he's just got dollar signs in his eyes and he's wringing his hands together like,
I must say, though, Shelley, that I am loving your interpretation of his inner dialogue. This is fantastic.
George was going to think on that in the morning. And George closed his eyes and he chuckled to himself as he fell asleep. He was about to poke a little fun at the biblical literalist and put a giant in the earth. The next day, George Hull put his idea into motion. He was going to go see if he could get the minister and the rest of the God-fearing world to believe in a fake. Throughout the rest of 1867 and most of 1868, Hull spent nearly $3,000 to bring his giant to life.
Damn.
Now, $3,000 in today's money is about $62,240.
Whew.
Yeah.
And
this is a pricey hoax.
Talking about somebody just trying to prove a point. That is petty on a level I am not petty on.
This is the kind of shit I would do. I wouldn't do it at a tune of $62,000. But
said, dude, call him Tom because this motherfucker's petty.
Absolutely. So here's how he started. He first made a model of a man lying on his back out of clay. He had to have something to go by. And then he traveled to Fort Dodge, Iowa, where he secured a massive 11-foot, 5-ton block of gypsum. And in order not to raise suspicion at the quarry, he told them that that was for a patriotic monument to make a statue of Abraham Lincoln. And he paid for the stone with a barrel of beer. That's what the cost was.
All right.
And he planned to have it taken to Chicago by horse and wagon. Now, there was a slight miscalculation on George's part. The horse and wagons couldn't carry a solid 5-ton block of gypsum. So George reduced it to a 2-ton block. And the horses and wagons were able to move that block of gypsum to the train station. And it was sent by rail to Chicago, where George had a guy waiting to receive it. George Hull had hired a German stonecutter named Edward Burghardt to carve the stone into the likeness of a man. Burghardt had agreed to help with the scheme in exchange for a little piece of the profits. But George swore the man to secrecy, impressing upon him that he could tell no one. George was so concerned about protecting the privacy of his plan that he insisted the windows of the stonecutter's building be kept covered. Burghardt and his lone assistant, he kept them stocked in beer so they'd stay out of the bars. He couldn't afford to have his plan ruined because somebody got drunk and got yappy. George Hull himself decided that he would pose as the model for the statue. And the sculptor spent the summer of 1868 fashioning the gypsum into an artificial anthropological wonder. It took the form of an anatomically correct, naked man lying on his back with his right arm grasping at his stomach and one leg crossed over the other. And the face was carved with a mysterious, sly half smile. And when it was finished, Burghardt summoned George Hull to Chicago to see the completed work. And geez, George took one look at the statue and he knew he had a problem. The sculptor made the face of the statue look just like George, completed with a mustache.
Oh, hell.
Well, it had to be fixed because it couldn't look like George. And FYI, hair does not petrify. So George ordered the removal of the hair. But another problem was glaringly obvious. The gypsum was a bright and gleaming white. It would never pass as petrified. The statue was just a little too perfect. So George and Burghardt, they decided they had to ugly it up. The men cut away some pieces from the underside of the body, mess it up a little bit. They made a tool out of a bundle of darning needles, and they pounded the needles over every inch of the body, making thousands of little holes that looked like the pores of the skin. And then the last step, they had to make it look old. George Hull procured 2 gallons of sulfuric acid and doused the statue, taking great care to swab into any areas that might have been missed. And the acid gave the stone a dingy brown color and the appearance of antiquity. And when finished, the sham colossus stood more than 10 feet tall and weighed nearly 3,000 pounds. Now he only needed a place to bury it. Now, George had contemplating sending it to Mexico and burying it there. But he reconsidered because that was just much too far away, and he couldn't risk somebody he didn't want finding it. So he ran through several options in his mind, and he finally decided he should put the giant in Onondaga Hollow in New York. See, geologists had already found petrified fish and reptiles in the area, and they had surmised that there might have been a lake at one point in the area due to the marked depression in the ground and the hills that rose up on either side. And in this little hollow sat the small little hamlet of Cardiff, which was made up of quite a few different religious communities. And lucky for George, he had a distant cousin named Stub Newell that had a little home and a farm there. So he wrote to his buddy Stub. And Stub agreed to have the giant buried on the property after George explained the scam and agreed to cut him in on part of the profits. Go ahead, Ryan.
I say, so this is a whole family affair. He's got his cousins in on it.
Yeah, it keeps saying distant cousin.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how distant it is, but keeps saying distant cousin.
Okay.
Name Stub. Stub.
Yeah,
S-T-U-B.
William Stubb Newell.
What a trustworthy name.
Like Stubb sounds like a shyster, doesn't he?
No, so you can't not trust somebody named Stubb. Come on.
Yeah. So Stubb agreed as long as he got kidded on the profits.
Okay.
And with Stubb sworn to secrecy and the giant now complete, George sealed the giant in an iron box and put it on the train from Chicago to Syracuse. And the box was loaded onto the wagon in the cover of darkness. And the giant headed from Syracuse south to Stubb Newell's farm in Cardiff. Now, George and the giant arrived after midnight in a pouring rainstorm. George pulled the wagon into the back of Stubb's barn, and they covered the giant with hay. Now, over the next 2 weeks, the men dug a grave roughly 12 feet long and 5 feet deep, working at night so as not to draw any unnecessary attention. And on a chilly night in early November of 1968, the grave was ready for its occupant. They used the horses to pull the massive statue from its box and into the pit. The interment took place in the dead of night. They filled the hole and worked quickly to remove any trace of the midnight burial. The men had agreed to leave the statue undisturbed for 1 year. It needed to have the illusion that it had rested beneath the dirt for centuries.
Okay.
And George told Stubb that he would write when it was time to discover the giant.
And
Did you have a question?
I was going to say, because this was already a dig site though, right? People were already digging in this area, or no?
No, this is on Stubb Newell's farm.
Okay. And because my question was going to be, you've cleared it up, but my question was going to be, how did these workers not realize freshly disturbed dirt? But I guess the whole year-long thing.
They agreed 1 year.
Yeah.
They agreed 1 year, and George was going to let him know when to do this. So, let's see. I lost my place. Okay. So the next morning, they've done the deed. They buried the giant body. And the next morning, George Hull returned to his home in Binghamton and busied himself with his cigar business. And Stubb Newell continued to work on his farm. And they both waited. One morning, a letter arrived, and it was from George. He instructed Stubb to resurrect the giant. Now, it hadn't quite been a year, but following orders, Stubb put the plan into action. On Saturday, October the 16th of 1869, Stubb Newell hired some unsuspecting workers to dig a well near his barn. Stubb directed the men where to dig and told them the well only needed to be about 5 feet deep. And he went back to the farmhouse. Okay, that's suspicious. I was
going to say that's.
Yeah.
You're either up to something or you're about to bury a body. That would be my first question. Like,
like, the water table was about 12 foot. I don't know.
Most of the time, like I have a water well and we had to go down about 135 feet. Most wells average anywhere between 100 and 500 feet in depth for a water well on a property. So he goes, it only needs to be about 5 feet. Go ahead. I'm going back to the house. So,
and the well digger's like, that's money, whatever.
They're like, you want 5 feet? We can get 5 feet done real easy for you.
Okay.
And now this did seem a little shallow, but they began to dig.
Money's money.
The men had only dug about 2 feet and 9 inches before their shovels hit the large stone. And one of the men tried to pry the stone up, but he was unsuccessful. It was just too big. So they began to dig around the edge, trying to figure out how big it actually was. And as the dirt was removed, it soon became apparent. They were looking at a huge stone, human-looking foot. The men became alarmed, and they summoned Stubb back down to the dig site. Stubb stood over the massive foot and took in the scene. And after a moment, with a hint of panic in his voice for dramatic effect, he said, "Cover it up, rebury the thing, tell no one what you saw. And once you do that, you can dig the well over here."
So none of these fools thought to, okay, first off, it's suspicious that I'm digging a 5-foot well, and now I uncover whatever the hell this is supposed to be. Nobody thought that there was something rotten in Denmark, just like something was just fucking.
No.
Like, where do y'all get it? Where do y'all get these stories? I wonder. I mean, this week we've got all this happening. Last week we had wise guys happening. Like,
yeah.
So Stubb being dramatic, once you cover it up, you can dig the well over here. And he indicated the new spot for the well. You just take your ass out of there and you saw nothing.
He's just like, you saw nothing. There is nothing here. Do not tell anybody what you saw here.
Well, here's the thing. The workers were stunned. Cover it up? No way. One of the men grabbed a shovel and with a frenzied energy began to dig, and the others joined in. They had to see if there was more than just a foot. And in less than an hour, the stunned laborers had excavated the body of a massive man. And it didn't take long for the news of the discovery to spread through Cardiff. It went house to house that there was a petrified giant on Stubb Newell's farm. And people began to come to see if it was true. That Saturday, all who came to see the giant got to see it for free. According to a witness that was present that day, Stubb Newell acted his part very well. He seemed genuinely perplexed when the stone man was dug up. But by the next day, Stubb had set up a tent over the 10-foot, 5-inch colossus, complete with a ticket taker, and was charging 25 cents to get a peek. 25 cents in that day was about $5.40 in today's money.
Saying, first taste is free. If you want to see it again, you have to pay for it.
Now, 2 days later, Stubb raised the price to 50 cents, which is about $10 in today's money. And on his best day of ticket sales, the enterprising farmer made about $220, the equivalent of $4,757 today.
That's a good day's work.
Now, all the newspapers of the day flocked to the farm and reported on the story. Harper's Weekly even did a feature on the Cardiff Giant. And the speculation mounted as to exactly what the stone giant was. Stubb Newell played the part of the humble farmer with great conviction. He would publicly vow to rebury the damn thing and forget all about this. And then he would allow his neighbors to convince him that the discovery might be of great historical significance. You can't rebury it, Stubb. Well, the attention from the press brought out even more people, including Stubb's cousin George Hull. George Hull arrived at the farm 3 days later, claiming that he had heard the news on the street and came to see the marvel for himself. The frenzy for the stone man began to grow. Stubb set up tents on his farm, and his wife sold sandwiches to those who had seen or who were waiting to see the marvel. Stubb also sent wagons to the train station to bring people out to the farm, for a fee, of course. And people came by the wagon loads. Thousands of them from all over the country. Those that came to the farm just couldn't believe their eyes. Soon, offers began to pour in to buy the stone that was now being hailed as the Cardiff Giant, or the Goliath of Cardiff. Clergymen and religious followers were sure that Newell had made a most important biblical discovery. Pastors were preaching sermons citing that the finding on the Newell farm was verification of the Bible scripture about giants from Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at a time when society was anxious to believe, Hull gave them something to believe in. And George Hull's sly smile grew into a devilishly large grin.
Just twisting his mustache on the
Yes,
side.
he is. You can just
yes.
see it. Going,
How
Jesus,
delicious.
look at these assholes. I can just see this.
Delicious. And he's chewing on a stogie.
Mm-hmm. The Cardiff Giant had suddenly become big business to the local economy in Cardiff. And there was such a surge of sightseers that the 2 small hotels in town couldn't accommodate them all. And the trains to Cardiff were full of people. Everyone seemed to be profiting. And people quickly realized the value of the giant. And there were many offers to buy the prize. Some men were willing to gift Stub Newell their farm. And some even offered to buy it flat outright for thousands of dollars. But Stub had his own idea about doing. One of them was to give up farming. He wisely held on to his treasure like a miser. The giant even caught the attention of circus entrepreneur P.T. Barnum, who offered $50,000 to take the giant on tour. But Stub turned him down too. There was so much money at stake that the locals feared that Newell might take his petrified treasure elsewhere or he might sell it. And the interest in the giant only seemed to be growing with no signs of slowing down. So, and this is how it was described in the story, a syndicate of Syracuse businessmen made Stub and his silent partner George an offer that they couldn't refuse. After a brief meeting, and that is how it is phrased in 3 or 4 places that I found it.
You come to me on this farm. You tried to buy my giant.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So a syndicate of Syracuse businessmen made Stub and his silent partner George an offer they couldn't refuse. And after a brief meeting, the conspirators agreed that it was time to cash in, and they accepted. 1 week after the giant's discovery, on October the 23rd of 1968, the businessmen paid $30,000 for a 75% stake in the giant. That would be $648,699 in today's money.
God almighty.
Damn.
And they took 75%, which means that Stub Newell was still getting 25% of every bit of the profit that the giant made.
Wow.
And this ensured all parties that the giant would stay in the area and put profits back into their hands. One of the businessmen, David Hamnam, was a banker and a horse trader with a keen eye for a big score, and he watched the people pay their money to see the giant. Hamnam allegedly knew it was a hoax and is said to have remarked in the moment, "There's a sucker born every minute."
So that's where the quote comes from.
That is where a lot of people attribute that quote to P.T. Barnum. It's alleged that it was David Hamnam who actually said there's a sucker born every minute. By November the 5th, the decision had been made to raise the giant from his grave and move him to Syracuse, where they could make even more money and take it on tour. It was a good idea and a good business model. But in Syracuse, the giant came under much closer scrutiny. Numerous scientists, archaeologists, and geologists traveled to see the petrified giant. The central debate was between those who thought it was a petrified man and those who believed it to be an ancient statue. Now, the petrificationists theorized that it was one of the giants that was mentioned in the Bible, specifically in Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days. Y'all are going to know that Bible verse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though the group clung to the petrified man hypothesis, some were beginning to kind of doubt the discovery's authenticity. Those that promoted the statue theory followed the lead of Dr. John F. Boynton, who speculated that Jesuit missionaries had actually carved it sometime during the 17th century to impress the indigenous people of the area. New York State geologist James Hall and Rochester University professor Henry Ward supported the statue theory. What, Ryan?
I was just laughing because these people are completely talking out of their ass. They were experts on this seems to be carved in the days of 1700. That is so, these so-called experts, you know.
Now, Andrew White, who was the first president of Cornell University, quickly declared it to be a fake, and he even wrote a paper over the topic. But a crucial blow was struck by Othniel C. Marsh, a paleontologist from Yale, who seemed to only need a passing glance to pronounce it of, and I'm going to quote him, very recent origin and a most decided humbug. He pointed out that the chiseled marks were still plainly visible, and the marks should have worn away if the giant had been in the ground for any appreciable length of time. And when speaking with a reporter, Marsh, shaking his head, said, "It's remarkable." The reporter quickly asked, "Can I quote you on that?" And Marsh responded, "Yes, it's a remarkable fake." But the funny thing is that the public didn't care what the scientist had to say. They kept coming at a rate of more than 400 a day. They even began to affectionately refer to the giant as Old Hoaxy. I didn't care. I didn't care.
Oh man, not much has changed. People are.
I know.
I'm sorry. I just have to read this comment that just came in about this story, and it says they should drill a hole in its ass and see what kind of shit they find.
I like whoever commented that. That's funny. Now I'm going to tell you that where some saw fraud, others saw dollar signs. One day after Marsh's inspection and declaring the giant a hoax, P.T. Barnum showed back up to view the giant in Syracuse. Recognizing the popularity of the giant, Barnum offered the new owners $60,000 for a 3-month touring lease. The Syracuse businessmen turned him down. Well, the greatest showman would not be defeated. Barnum paid an artist named Wesley Jukes to build him an exact plaster replica, which he put on display in his museum in New York. The ads for the exhibit ask, "What is it? Is it a statue? Is it petrification? Is it a stupendous fraud? Is it the remains of a former race?" And then Barnum began to claim that his giant was the real one and the one in Syracuse was the fake.
I was going to say, the last person you want to keep turning down is P.T. Barnum. He's going to find a way to make money off of you or with you. It depends which way you want to go.
This has got to be the weirdest feud in history.
Oh, and it only gets worse. Soon the new fake was drawing bigger crowds than the original fake was. And it even outsold the original when it finally arrived in New York in December. And to complicate matters even more, the man who made Barnum's forgery, Wesley Jukes, decided he'd make some other copies of it. And by the end of the year, 6 Cardiff Giants were being exhibited around the country. Now, this infuriated the Syracuse syndicate, and they sued Barnum. The judge refused to hear the case unless the genuineness of the original could be proven. The businessman argued, "How are we supposed to get a stone to prove it's real?" And the judge sternly stated, "Get your giant to swear his own genuineness in a court of law if you want a favorable injunction." And then the judge threw the case out, saying you can't sue a fake over a fake.
All I can hear from this Syracuse syndicate is like, "You went against the family."
Yeah. But I thought it was funny that the judge was like, "Get your giant in here to swear it's the real giant." And they're like, "How are we supposed to do that?" Yeah, you can't
prove a fake.
Over a fake. Yeah, you can't sue over a fake of a fake.
Mm-mm.
But there was still a surprise in store for the syndicate, a problem that they never saw coming. And that problem was that Stub Newell had a big mouth. Apparently, old Stubb had been having a good laugh with his kinfolks about the trick he and cousin George had played on everyone with the fake archaeological specimen. Oh, and the papers went wild once again. Reports began to surface claiming that Stubb Newell had admitted to a relative that the Cardiff Giant was fake. Local resident Daniel Luch reported that he remembered hauling a heavy load to Cardiff about a year earlier, and he suspected that was probably the Cardiff Giant. Reporters learned that Newell had transferred a large sum of cash to George Hull immediately after selling the Giant. And a mining engineer caused a stir when he noted that gypsum would have deteriorated quickly in the soggy soil of Newell's farm.
Newsflash, the Cardiff Giant, fake.
Pretty much. Go ahead, Roger. Breaking news. You know you want to.
Breaking news, 1924, the Cardiff Giant, absolutely fake.
It's 1869.
1869, whatever.
Yeah. I think it's 1869. I've already forgotten now, dude. Give it.
Oh, man.
It's 1868. Yeah.
God.
So it was Stubbs' inability to keep a secret that ultimately led to a confession by his co-conspirator, George Hull. Now, George, having already cashed out, came clean and admitted that he was actually the real brains behind the hoax. He confessed that he was tired of preachers claiming that Bible stories were true, and he maintained that only the most gullible people would believe in such far-fetched stories. Therefore, he had decided to create a fake giant. And then George decided to unburden himself further and provided the details of the deception. He claimed that the truth came out because Newell was puffed up and just couldn't contain himself and spilled the secret. Newell had taken to bragging to friends and relatives about the hoax. George explained that once he realized the secret had leaked, he knew soon he would be exposed. So he just had decided to admit the truth, which would also discredit the clergy who he believed to be perpetrating a hoax on the public by declaring Bible stories to be literal and true. Now, after George confessed, the fallout was quick. The consortium of businessmen who had purchased the Giant knew that it would affect their profits. And they initially tried to squash the story by claiming that George was lying and he'd been put up to it by jealous people in other cities. But it was just too late. Hull's confession was plastered all over the newspapers, and it had too much detail to be ignored. And at the end of 1869, that was also the end of the profits for Stubb Newell and the businessmen. The famous Cardiff Giant was a giant fraud. Go ahead.
Nothing, I just said, but
I mean, they should have quit while they were ahead and sold it to people. He wasn't even asking to buy it. He was just asking to lease it and take it on the road for a little bit. They could have gotten so much more, profit out of this thing had they just played ball with P.T. Barnum.
Yeah. Well, by early 1870, the Giant went from fascination to ridicule. Some still argued for the antiquity of the statue, but new salacious stories were filling the pages of newspapers every day. Even George Hull started publicly bragging about his brilliant hoax. The ruse finally crumbled in February when the paper printed the confession of a The ruse finally crumbled in February when the paper printed the confession of a Chicago stonecutter, Edward Burkhart, and his assistant.
I'm sorry. The picture we just showed, was the cartoon man holding the giant's penis?
A fig leaf. No, a fig leaf over
Oh.
Okay, I couldn't tell.
Throw that back up there. I didn't quite see that.
Yeah, he's holding a little fig leaf up there.
Oh, I see it now. I was wondering for a second. I was like, wow, we're crossing into some weird territory here.
They actually were using that in an ad, and they were allowed to use it as an ad if they put George Hull's picture there. So that's why George Hull's picture is on the ad.
This is a picture of the world's first fluffer.
We're almost done. So let me reread. Let me reset that. The ruse
Okay.
finally crumbled in February when the paper printed the confession of a Chicago stonecutter, Edward Burghardt,
Okay.
and his assistant that they had been the ones who chiseled the giant statue into being. The Syracuse syndicate of businessmen continued to exhibit the Cardiff Giant under the name America's Goliath. Yeah, but the crowd numbers continued to wane. And by 1880, it had been condemned to storage in a barn in Massachusetts. And after that, it passed between various owners and toured here and there on the carnival circuit and state fairs. And in 1936, Gardner Cowles Jr., an Iowa publisher, bought the Cardiff Giant and used it as a coffee table in his basement rumpus room.
Come over here, George. I've got the Cardiff Giant in the basement.
Now, in 1948, the New York Historical Association in Cooperstown bought the giant from Cowles and put it on display in 1949 in the recently created Farmers Museum. And they were immediately sued by Michael Fitzmaurice.
Who?
Now, here we go, new player. Fitzmaurice claimed that his grandfather, Wesley Jukes, was the creator of the giant and had loaned it to P.T. Barnum. The suit contended that Barnum took the giant on loan for a tour. The giant was supposed to be returned to Jukes when the tour ended. And according to the lawsuit, Barnum had stolen the giant and Jukes never saw it again.
How does he have claim to this though? Because Burghardt said that he carved the giant and Jukes made a completely separate giant for P.T. Barnum.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. All right, I'm saying
okay. I'm getting to it.
All right, I got you.
Okay. So, right, Jukes was the creator of Barnum's giant. Burghardt was the creator of Hull's giant. Okay. Now, according to the lawsuit, Barnum had stolen the giant and Jukes never saw it again. Now, Fitzmaurice claimed that he had only just learned of the giant's whereabouts, and then he filed the claim. He wanted either $100,000 or the return of the giant. And once again, there was a lawsuit over dueling fake giants. And once again, it made the news. Here was the problem with Fitzmaurice's lawsuit. It dismissed the fact that there were two giants. George Hull's giant, created by Burghardt, and P.T. Barnum's giant, created by Wesley Jukes. Fitzmaurice was correct that his grandfather's giant was never returned. But the Cardiff Giant in Cooperstown was well documented as the one that George Hull had used to fool thousands of people. And once again, the judge had to rule on the merit of the lawsuit. And he tossed it out. It seemed hard to sue over a fake of a fake. Or in this case, the fake of a fake of a fake. Now,
Jesus criminy.
Mm-hmm. And now, as for George Hull, the rest of George's life was pretty anticlimactic. He left Binghamton in 1880 and he moved to California and then to Wisconsin before moving back to Binghamton in the 1890s. And in early 1902, he fell gravely ill and died on October the 21st, 1902. His obituary in the Boston Journal was barely a footnote reading, and I'm going to read you this. Obituary: Cardiff Giant, George Hull, who fooled the public with that figure, dead at 81. Binghamton, New York. George Hull, famous as the man who in 1870 devised the Cardiff Giant, the greatest hoax of the day, is dead in poverty at his home near Bingham, New York. He was 81 years old. That is how his obituary reads.
Wow.
Damn.
Somebody might have been a little irritated with him.
Yeah,
a little bit.
He pulled the wool over the public's eyes and he's pissed about it.
Now, you can still see the giant on display today in the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York.
Oh,
The
cool.
story of the Cardiff Giant outlived the story of its creator, and many have declared the Cardiff Giant to be one of the greatest hoaxes of all time. Its size and mysterious presence caught the attention of post-Civil War Americans. Believers and skeptics shared a moment of intrigue and wonder, even if it was fleeting. There is no marker that commemorates the existence of George Hull, a fact that he would most likely have been very displeased about, considering his ego. But he did leave his mark on history, and it was a giant one.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I see what you did there.
So,
Ha ha
so Blake, could you go back to the picture of it laying at the museum? Not the second one, but the first one.
This one?
Yeah. Is it starting to break down? Because it looks like there's gravel around the back, or is that part of the actual sculpture? Do you know?
No, that's part of the exhibit. Remember, he
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably a display.
Okay, yeah.
That's
You're
probably
right,
just for display.
Yeah.
I've never seen it, but now I feel like I must go.
Oh yeah, no, I want to go check this out. Now, do we know if Jukes's Giant is at the P.T. Barnum Museum?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and yes, P.T. Barnum's Giant, Jukes's Giant is on display, and I didn't put that in there because I wasn't following the story of P.T. Barnum's Giant, because that was the fake of the
fake of the
fake
fake.
of the
Yes.
fake.
the
Yeah.
fake of the original fake,
Mhm.
right? And so I did, but yes, P.T. Barnum's is on display, and I want to say it's in I think it's in Fort Dodge, Iowa. I believe is where that one is.
Huh.
So
I believe
Okay.
that you are right, because we had a couple of people actually mentioning that in the comments.
yeah,
So
I believe P.T. Barnum's, and then there is another, or the one in Fort Dodge, Iowa, claims to be P.T. Barnum's. But the
Mhm.
problem is that P.T. Barnum's Giant wasn't well documented where it went from. The Cooperstown, the ones in
Right.
Cooperstown, is George Hull's.
Right.
And but
Because Barnum's
there's
was a gaff of a gaff.
yeah,
Yeah.
was a fake of the original fake. But remember, there were 6 other ones that were made off of Barnum's. They replicated it 6 more times after Barnum had his made. And there's another one that is in another museum. I want to say it's in Maine or somewhere like that claims that it is also Barnum's Giant. But
I mean, there's no way you can track that down.
no,
We'll just have to go all the
No.
way across the country and see all of them.
I guess so. From what I understand, that there are 3 that are
Okay.
displayed in 3 different museums. The Cooperstown, the one in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and then there's another one. It escapes me. I knew I should have written that down. I knew you were going to ask me that, but I didn't. I didn't write it down. So, because I was only following the original fake.
The original fake, yeah.
I'm like, leave it to Ryan to
So-
ask those kind of questions.
Hey man, I asked
Here-
the hard hitting deep questions. Sorry.
This is one that I really like this story. Just the whole,
Mhm.
just George Hull, just such a snake oil salesman, such a flim
Right.
flam man, And
Right.
again, you can see him, and I just imagine this dude, talking like old Archie Bunker. Wait a minute. Don't read to tell me you think there are giants stomping around. Yeah, whenever you could tell when I was writing that, and some of that dialogue, of course, is I took a little
Liberty.
artistic license on it,
Well, you can imagine
And,
the conversation for sure.
right? But this
Yeah.
is from
Right.
what he, from what he kind of pulled. I pulled from interviews in the paper with him, saying that Mr. Turk got into arguing about the Bible, and he couldn't believe that he thought giants were real. He said, and I kept questioning him, do you really think they're real? So my dialogue is imagined per se, but it's based off accounts from George of the conversation that took place. So I'm sure I shortened it a little bit because
Yeah.
that debate probably went on for a good hour or so, however long they were on the train. So
Oh yeah, I mean, you get to talking to someone about a deep topic. I mean, God, look how long we debate on on these podcasts. I mean, when we turn the cameras off, we're still debating. So,
Yeah.
right,
but
right.
man, what like you said, I like him. He's a total flim flam artist. He's a total snake oil salesman. He was, like I said, petty to prove a massive point on his end, and man, just the lengths he went through just to piss people
That
off.
is a patient man.
Yes.
To put basically $3,000 of your money in the dirt,
Mhm.
literally,
Right.
and wait a year and
Yeah.
see if it pays off. That is some kind of patience for payback,
Mm-hmm.
and that alone. But he didn't actually wait a year. He was 2 weeks shy of a full year. At that point, he just couldn't stand it. He's like, resurrect the giant stuff, get him up.
Well, and two, when it comes to Stubb, if y'all have learned anything from this podcast, if you're going to commit some sort of backhanded anything, don't do it with someone who's got a big mouth and is going to go blab it to everybody because you're going to get found out. Do what you do in the dark. Do it in secret.
Don't get in bed with a rat.
I mean,
so our viewer, are they are people watching? Did they like this story? Are they enjoying this story?
Yeah, I mean, it was for me, it's an interesting one. I was a little sad to learn that there's not giants in Cardiff, New York.
But
there
Bible
are,
says,
but there are giants in New York.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
You should be proud of that joke, Shelley. A sports reference for me. Look at me go.
Good for you. I knew what you were
to be the only fucking sports joke you're ever gonna get from me on here.
Do we know if the New York Giants are referencing the Cardiff Giant?
I have no idea.
That'd be
Probably
interesting.
Not.
Because I know the Carolina Panthers are referencing like a alleged Black Panther that is from the Carolinas that nobody knows about. So I didn't know if that was not nobody knows about, but people allege is out there. So I didn't know if the New York Giants were also the same thing. That'd be interesting to find out.
I knew I shouldn't have brought up football with you two on the screen. I'm going to learn my lesson.
From discussing football, and you know how much I want to. No, I truly do not know. I don't know, Ryan, but that would be interesting to try to. That'd be interesting for you to dig up in your free time.
Yes, I may do that.
So this one, it didn't run as long, but that's pretty much the story. This is not a long story, even though it was a long process to make this story. From the time that the giant was unearthed, it was in October of 1869. By February of 1870, it was done. This is not a story that stretched years and years. It stretched weeks and weeks. So go ahead.
I say, and sometimes these stories, are a little bit shorter because there's only a certain finite amount of information about some of these things. When you start digging into some real deep.
Now I will tell you, the old George Hull, he continued to be a flim-flam man. He tried to do another giant called the Solid Muldoon, which he actually teamed up with Barnum to do, but the public was like, "No, fool me once, get your ass out of here with your Solid Muldoon." And then he had actually
Solid
tried
Muldoons.
several more. Yeah,
Sorry.
We'll do that one at some point too. That one's another one that's just freaking ridiculous. But he actually had a hand in quite a few. Now I will tell you that Mark Twain references that was inspired by the Cardiff Giant. There are songs that have the Cardiff Giant reference. And this actually was an inspiration for a lot of people, and it's even I think it's even mentioned in Nancy Drew in the Hardy Boys book, the Cardiff Giant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's one of those things that it did inspire people, just because the fakery and the level of grandeur and expense that this one man went to pull off a hoax.
Mm-hmm.
The lengths he went through, man,
to prove a point, to quote unquote prove a point, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, final thoughts, anybody?
I admire him. I admire him a lot. I think it's to take that to use that amount of money and take that to that extent. Like I said, petty on a level that I am not petty on, and it's interesting to watch from afar. So
I definitely love and enjoy covering topics like this because it's not every day that we get on here and just present just a straight out hoax.
Right.
A lot of times we're talking about more serious topics. So to bring a story like this to the screen, to our listeners, to our viewers, and just laugh and have a good time about it. I loved it. I thought it was great. Like I said, the only thing I knew about it was that it was thought to be a large, giant, petrified man. I had a feeling it was a hoax. But yes, I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I thought it was a great one. And it's definitely in the more comical of the quote unquote paranormal category. So great job on that. I thought it was great.
One of my favorite hoax stories. Because they tell you at the beginning it's a hoax, but whenever you're going through it, you kind of thinking, well, could it? but you know it's a hoax from get-go. You know it is. George's, and it's like, but that's really cool. Why can't it be real? Why can't Genesis 4, there were giants in the earth in those days? Why can't we find one? What are big some bitches? Yeah.
I think that there was. Let me look at like Elephant Rock and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there have been giant fossils, none that are 10 feet, some that are high 7 feet, close to 8 feet in height of fossilized remains that have been found. Yes, there have been, but no 10-footers. 8 feet. Give me a 10-foot son of a bitch. Now we talk. That's a giant.
I reserve my thoughts on
that. That's one solid Muldoon.
Yes, it is. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know before our listeners completely drop out of us?
If I could stop crying for just a second for Ryan's last comment. Jesus, Ryan. Oh, all right. Well, if y'all need even more from us, you can watch our brand new talk show on called After Dark with WP, exclusively on Paraflix Paranormal Plus. Our entire first season is now available on the platform. We have 8 episodes consisting of interviews with other individuals in the paranormal field and haunted location owners, and our paranormal investigations with evidence you won't see anywhere else other than Paraflix. Paraflix is available on Amazon Fire, Roku TV, Apple TV, iOS, and Google Play. So make sure you are using the link that is posted in the comments now, or for those of our listeners instead, you can check the show notes and you use that link, use our code AFTERDARK25 for 25% off your annual subscription. Tomorrow we will post up our Linktree link, which will include links to everything that we do. That is going to be the link to the Paraflix that we just talked about, every social media platform that we are on, our online merchandise store, our public investigations, and our Patreon page. Our Patreon page is the fastest and easiest way you can directly help support the show. For just $5 a month, you will gain access to over 250 plus Patreon exclusive videos. This support goes directly to the show and the adventures that we get to bring you week after week. This price will never change. And currently with that, you get our pre and post broadcasts, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after the live stream broadcast ends, where we discuss things further, debate, fight, argue, and just act goofy as hell. Our special video cast and Paracon speaking events are also on there. And as of last week, it is now going to also include our Patreon exclusive raw and unedited investigation footage. So last week we posted up 2 of our Estes methods in their entirety from the Squirrel Cage jail investigation we did back in December the 2nd. And there's going to be plenty more of those to come. So this is something new we're now offering, where you get to watch our raw footage and let us know what you see or hear. It's not going to just be Estes methods. We've also got visual and audio evidence that we will be sharing as well on there. So if you've ever wanted to review our evidence with us, now's your chance. It's only on Patreon though. So make sure you're following us across all social media platforms, as we are now starting to release different pieces of evidence as well as announcements for tickets and investigations to different social media channels. So if you're just following us on one channel, you're only getting a small portion of the story. These are all the ways you can directly support everything Vaguely Paranormal, but we also appreciate your love and support for us through those likes, comments, shares, views, and downloads. And as always, remember, any questions, comments, stories you'd like to share with us, those can be submitted to us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Do me a giant favor, like, share, and subscribe. So we want to thank you guys for joining us on Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Ryan Robertson, Mr. Blake Smith. Thank you for joining us, and as always, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.